The winter of 1887 descended upon the Montana plains like a merciless predator, burying the small town of Redemption Ridge beneath layers of snow and ice. Sarah Mitchell stood before the cracked mirror in her one-room cabin, her trembling fingers running through the only treasure she had left, her long, auburn hair that cascaded down to her waist like rivers of copper and gold. Her daughter, Emily, just 5 years old, lay curled beneath threadbare blankets on the narrow bed, her small body shivering despite the meager fire struggling to survive in the hearth. The child's cheeks, once rosy and full, had grown hollow over the past 3 months since consumption had claimed Sarah's husband, Thomas. "Mama, I'm so hungry," Emily's weak voice cut through the silence like a knife through Sarah's heart. Sarah blinked back tears, her own stomach cramping with the familiar pain of emptiness. The cupboards had been bare for 2 days. She'd sold everything of value, Thomas's tools, their wedding china, even her mother's silver locket. Everything except her hair. The town's only baker, Mr. Henderson, had made her an offer yesterday. He collected women's hair to sell to wig makers in the eastern cities. For hair as long and beautiful as Sarah's, he would give her enough money for a week's worth of bread and perhaps some milk for Emily. A week wasn't much, but it was hope. It was survival. Sarah wrapped her shawl tighter around her thin shoulders and made her decision. She would go to Henderson's bakery at dawn. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her daughter's life was worth more than vanity, more than the last connection she had to the woman she'd been before grief had carved away her happiness. That night, Sarah lay beside Emily, stroking her daughter's fevered forehead and singing the lullabies Thomas used to hum while working in the fields. She remembered their wedding day, how he'd woven wildflowers into her hair and promised her a life of abundance. He'd kept that promise for 7 beautiful years before the sickness took him. Now, she was alone in a world that had little mercy for widows and orphans. As the first light of dawn crept through the frost-covered window, Sarah rose and braided her hair one last time. She dressed Emily in the warmest clothes they had, a patchwork dress Sarah had sewn from Thomas's old shirts and a coat that was already too small. "Where are we going, Mama?" Emily asked, her blue eyes curious despite her weakness. "To get you some breakfast, sweetheart," Sarah replied, forcing brightness into her voice. The walk to Henderson's bakery took 15 minutes through snow that came up to Sarah's knees. She carried Emily on her hip, feeling the child's frail body against her own. The morning was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath her boots and the occasional howl of wind through the pine trees. Redemption Ridge was barely awake. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, but the streets were empty. Most families were struggling themselves, rationing their supplies to survive until spring. As Sarah approached the bakery, the scent of fresh bread made her dizzy with hunger. Through the window, she could see Mr. Henderson arranging loaves on his shelves, his round face red from the heat of his ovens. She took a deep breath, touched her hair one final time, and reached for the door handle. This was the moment everything would change. She would trade the last piece of her former self for her daughter's survival. The bakery door chimed as Sarah pushed it open, bringing a gust of cold air that made Mr. Henderson look up from his work. His expression shifted when he saw her, recognition mixed with something that might have been pity or perhaps satisfaction at a profitable transaction. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, wiping flour from his hands. "I wondered if you'd come." Sarah set Emily down gently, keeping her hand on her daughter's shoulder. I've decided to accept your offer, Mr. Henderson. My hair for a week's worth of bread." Henderson nodded, already reaching for the scissors he kept on a shelf behind the counter. "It's good hair, long and thick. I can give you 6 loaves and 2 quarts of milk." Before Sarah could respond, the door chimed again. A tall figure entered, bringing with him the smell of leather, horses, and open plains. The man was a cowboy, that much was clear from his worn boots, weathered hat, and the bandana tied loosely around his neck. His face was tanned and creased from years under the sun, but his eyes, a startling gray like storm clouds, held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Morning, Henderson," the cowboy said, his voice a deep rumble. Then his gaze fell on Sarah and Emily, taking in their thin frames and threadbare clothes in one sweeping glance. "Mornin', Colt," Henderson replied. "Just conducting some business here." The cowboy, Colt, removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver. "What kind of business?" Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, humiliation washing over her. She didn't want witnesses to her degradation. "It's private," she said quietly. But Henderson, eager to move forward, explained anyway. "Mrs. Mitchell here is selling her hair. Fair trade, her hair for bread to feed her child." Colt's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, then at Emily, who was leaning heavily against her mother's leg, exhausted from the short walk. "How much hair?" Colt asked. "All of it," Henderson said, brandishing the scissors. "Down to the scalp if she wants the full price." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her braid, and she saw Colt notice the gesture. She lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity. "It's just hair. It will grow back." "Will it?" Colt asked softly, and Sarah wasn't sure if he was asking about the hair or something deeper, her dignity, her hope, her sense of self. He turned to Henderson. "Put those scissors down." Henderson frowned. "Now, Colt, this ain't your concern." "I'm making it my concern." Colt pulled out a leather pouch from his coat pocket. "How much for a month's worth of bread and supplies for Mrs. Mitchell and her daughter?" Sarah's heart began to pound. "Sir, I can't accept charity." Colt's gaze met hers, and the intensity in his eyes silenced her protest. "It's not charity, ma'am. Consider it an investment." "An investment in what?" Sarah asked, confused. "In keeping beautiful things beautiful," Colt replied simply. He turned back to Henderson. "Well, name your price for a month's supplies." Henderson calculated quickly, his merchant's mind working. $20. It was an outrageous sum, far more than a month's supplies should cost, but before Sarah could object, Colt counted out the coins and placed them on the counter. "Now," Colt said, his voice carrying an edge of steel, "load up a basket with bread, milk, eggs, flour, salt pork, and whatever else a family needs." "And Henderson? Don't let me hear about you trying to buy hair from desperate women again." Sarah stood frozen in shock as Henderson, grumbling under his breath, began filling a large basket with supplies. She watched Colt's weathered hands as he carefully selected additional items, a jar of honey, dried apples, even a small peppermint stick that he slipped to Emily with a conspiratorial wink. Emily's face lit up for the first time in weeks, and she clutched the candy like it was made of gold. "Sir," Sarah began, her voice trembling with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, "I don't understand. Why would you do this for strangers?" Colt turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "My mother was a widow once. After my father died in a stampede, she raised 3 boys alone. I remember what hunger looks like in a child's eyes, Mrs. Mitchell. I swore when I grew up that I'd never walk past that look without doing something about it." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "I have no way to repay you." "Didn't ask for repayment," Colt said. He picked up the heavy basket as if it weighed nothing. "Where's your cabin?" "I can carry it," Sarah protested weakly, but Colt was already heading toward the door. "I'm sure you can carry a lot of things, ma'am. Doesn't mean you should have to." The walk back to her cabin was surreal. Sarah carried Emily while Colt walked beside them, the basket balanced easily on his shoulder. The few townspeople who were out stared curiously at the unlikely trio, but Colt ignored them completely, his attention focused on navigating the snowy path. When they reached the small cabin, Sarah felt a wave of embarrassment at its condition. The roof sagged in one corner, the windows were patched with cloth where glass had broken, and the whole structure looked like it might collapse under the weight of the next heavy snow. If Colt noticed the disrepair, he didn't comment. He simply set the basket inside and took in the sparse interior with a practiced eye, the dying fire, the single bed, the empty cupboards now filling with the supplies he'd bought. "You'll need more firewood," he observed. "And that roof needs fixing before it caves in." "I know," Sarah said tiredly. "Thomas always handled those things. I've been trying, but you're one woman trying to do the work of 3 people while keeping your daughter alive," Colt finished gently. "No shame in that, Mrs. Mitchell." He walked to the door, then paused. "I've got a proposition for you, if you're willing to hear it." Sarah's guard went up immediately. She'd heard about propositions made to desperate widows, and none of them were honorable. What kind of proposition? Colt must have seen the fear in her eyes because he held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Nothing improper, ma'am. I promise you that. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of here, the Circle C. Winter's been hard on everyone, and I've lost 2 of my hands to better opportunities down south. I need help." "Help with what?" Sarah asked cautiously. "Cooking for the ranch hands, mostly. Mending clothes, keeping the bunkhouse clean. Basic household work. I'd pay you fair wages, enough for you and Emily to have your own room in the main house, 3 meals a day, and money to save for when spring comes." Sarah's mind raced. It seemed too good to be true. "Why would you offer this to me?" Colt met her eyes steadily. "Because you need work, and I need help. Because your daughter needs a warm place to sleep and regular meals. And because—" He paused, "because keeping your hair was important enough to you that you were willing to go hungry. That tells me you're a woman who values herself, and those are the kind of people I want working my land." Sarah looked down at Emily, who had fallen asleep in her arms, the peppermint stick still clutched in her small fist. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to refuse charity, to maintain her independence. But another voice, the voice of a mother who would do anything to save her child, urged her to consider this miracle. "I'm a hard worker," Sarah said finally. "I don't expect special treatment, and I'll earn every penny you pay me." A slow smile crossed Colt's face, transforming his stern features. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Mitchell." "Sarah," she corrected softly. "If I'm going to work for you, you should call me Sarah." "Sarah," he repeated, and the way he said her name, with respect and warmth, made something long dormant stir in her chest. "I'm Colt Brennan. We'll come for you and Emily tomorrow morning with a wagon. Pack what you want to bring." After Colt left, Sarah sat in her cabin, surrounded by more food than she'd seen in months, and let herself cry. They weren't tears of despair this time, but of relief, gratitude, and cautious hope. The next morning, true to his word, Colt arrived with a sturdy wagon and another ranch hand, a kind-faced older man named Pete who helped load Sarah's meager possessions with gentle efficiency. The ride to the Circle C ranch revealed a property far larger and more prosperous than Sarah had imagined. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, and the outbuildings were well-maintained and numerous. The room Colt showed her was clean and warm, with a real bed, a fireplace, and windows that actually had glass. Emily squealed with delight, running from corner to corner as if she'd discovered a palace. That first day, Sarah cooked dinner for 12 ranch hands and Colt himself. She put every ounce of her skill into the meal: roasted chicken, biscuits, gravy, and an apple pie made from the dried apples Colt had bought. When the men cleaned their plates and asked for seconds, she felt a pride she hadn't experienced in months. Over the following weeks, Sarah discovered that Colt Brennan was a man of his word. He treated her with unfailing respect, paid her exactly what he'd promised, and never once made her feel like she owed him anything beyond her work. The ranch hands, taking their cue from their boss, were courteous and appreciative. Emily thrived. Color returned to her cheeks, and her laughter, a sound Sarah had feared she might never hear again, rang through the ranch house. Colt carved her wooden horses and taught her to identify different bird calls. One evening, 3 months after their arrival, Sarah was washing dishes when Colt came to stand beside her, drying the plates she cleaned. "Your hair's growing back," he observed quietly. Sarah touched the short curls self-consciously. It'll take years to get back to what it was. It's beautiful now, Colt said simply. But then again, it was never really about the hair, was it? Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had saved her and her daughter without asking for anything in return. Why did you really help us, Colt? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I saw a woman willing to sacrifice the last beautiful thing she had to save her child. That kind of love and courage is rare, Sarah. It deserved to be protected, not exploited. As Sarah looked into his eyes, she realized that the winter that had tried to destroy her had instead led her to salvation, not just survival, but a new life, and perhaps, in time, a new love. She had been prepared to offer her hair for bread, but Colt had given her something infinitely more precious, hope, dignity, and a future where she would never have to choose between her self-worth and her child's survival again.